Today's August 26, 2024, and I'm honored to have with us today Professor David Barnhizer. David, tell us about your journey, your thoughts, and what brought you to write Conformity Colleges, and why do we have colleges that conform?
Well, I'm a professor, former professor. I'm still a professor emeritus of law at Cleveland State. I've taught in Westminster University, visiting professor multiple times in London, and a research fellow at the University of London. As I said before, I don't like to talk about myself much, and so I'll simply say I've done a huge amount of stuff in various ways: consultant within the Mongolian government, the U.S. government, Council on Environmental Quality, and one of the things that I am committed to, the intellectual life of people who are engaged in university and other teaching. That is one of the fundamental things. The other thing is I started my career after law school, went to Ohio State and Harvard on it. I started my career after law school as a civil rights lawyer in Colorado Springs. And that is where I have been: civil rights, social justice, and intellectual credibility. And certainly I'm interested in advancing critical social issues. Yes, justice issues, social issues, fairness and opportunity issues, and always have been. And some people, when they hear me speak, they assume that I must be a conservative. I'm not a conservative. I may be a classical liberal in the sense, I'm not going to try to define what that is, but I'm not a conservative. I'm not a progressive. I am somebody who is deeply, deeply committed to social justice and intellectual ideals and the political ideas of this country. Wrote one book that sort of guided me is one I published in the late 1990s, which is called The Warrior Lawyer, which used Sun Tzu's Art of War, Chinese military great strategist, master strategist, and Musashi, a Japanese strategist of the 14th century, in terms of defining how to achieve your goals and what thinking and critical thinking and action involved. Other than that, that's about all I need to say.
Yeah, I might take a stab at classical liberal because I think I might fall into that similar category to a point. I kind of more of a conservative, perhaps. I also have a problem with the term social justice, which I think is a little bit of an oxymoron. I think it's hard to be, have justice when you're considering social class and so forth. I mean, if A robs B, the crime was committed, and then to kind of, I think it muddies the water. It kind of over-intellectualizes things a little bit to start parsing, what are the motivations? If somebody shoots somebody else and that person's dead and it's not in war, I think the social aspect, I think, only clouds the issue of morality and the crime itself. So anyway, but as far as classical liberal, I mean, the term actually, has a sense of liberation, of freedom, liberty in it. And I think, the liberal arts, at least, were those things that the Romans taught to their citizen scholars, I guess, so they could kind of keep the place running well and have freedom. Now, of course, they had a multi-class system, and it helped to be a citizen, and there were a lot of people there who are not. I think it's a little bit like Abu Dhabi or something like that, or Qatar, where there's obviously different classes and whatnot. So it's easy to be a liberal if you're one of the landowners and so forth. Anyway, but who knows exactly what those things are? But I think we can agree that the colleges, might have started out in the framework of say more of the liberal arts, and I think now possibly very much so they're illiberal arts. And maybe we can talk about what that differentiation is, and what is a conformity college. Why did you title your book that? What are the things you found? What motivated you to write it?
Motivation was being a professor in a university or multiple universities for decades and teaching. I witnessed the gradual and deliberate shift from people who were intellectually stimulated, and including students, who came in, who were looking for knowledge, who were looking for information, who were looking to grow. And then I would preface it by saying, when I was at Harvard, I was in their clinic. I was a teacher in their clinical program and helped create it. And then uh, I went and became a professor in charge of developing the clinical programs at Cleveland State University. And people I had dealt with at Harvard called me and said they wanted me to become part of a movement. And I said, okay, tell me what it is. I mean, I had some respect and I liked them. They were semi-friends. And they went through all this information. I said, but what's it really about? And they said it's about Marxism and socialism. And what it was critical legal studies. That's how it was defined. Duncan Kennedy, Roberto Unger, and others were the ones who launched it at Harvard. Well, once they said it was Marxism, I said, I'm not going to be part of it. I don't do isms. I try to think for myself and teach jurisprudence and the like. And then what happened was that critical race theory developed and spread throughout universities from critical legal studies. It was the same essential thing, but it went into other departments of the university or other segments of the university. It was, and I could see it happening within about a 10-year period, it was a deliberate strategy to capture the universities. And so it grew. The hirings, the people who were hired, the people, it was opportunity, but there's supposed to be some merit there too. And it's everything that an academic does is not supposed to be a political diatribe trying to brainwash students or to teach them the professor's own political judgment and views. But that's what was going on. It went with academics and it went with the administrations. And that's where, you hear cancel culture. I wrote a book on that too. But the reality is the thing that drove me is I saw more and more and more capture of the university. And then I was thinking, well, guess what? I mean, the conformity colleges is about conformity, but part of it is also the people who are produced by those colleges, particularly in the teaching areas and so forth. They go into the K through 12 system and become teachers and administrators in the system. So that is part of the capture of the entire educational system. And so if you ask me why I wrote this book, that is why I wrote this book, because I hold the ideals of critical thinking, action, strategy, but honesty, not just I would never dream of trying to convince people that they have to think like I do, that they have to accept my values, or they're not legitimate people,
Right.
That makes sense.
I very much see that as a theme through your book, and I'll get to the book a little bit. But a lot of the people you cite, and I assume interviewed for the book, I've had on my show. Actually, I had Jennifer Say and Jeffrey Tucker and G. Van Fleet and probably many others within the book that you quote. But G. Van Fleet in particular, she basically is warning of Maoism coming to the United States. And it's a funny thing, all this critical thinking. I mean, who wouldn't like critical theory? Right? I mean, everyone wants to be a critic. It's always important to be. But I think a lot of these terms get co-opted, and it all sounds good. And you actually quote Walter Williams, what I posted on Twitter just now, the late and great Walter Williams.
No, he was, yes.
Yeah, and a lot of times it reminds me a little bit of Hamas. Hamas was all in favor of elections when they could go against the PLO in Gaza, and it's one man, one vote, one time, or Maduro or Chavez. You vote yourself in, you use the tools to get yourself in, and once you're in, you close the door for anybody else. And so similarly, I mean, Walter Williams, the quote you have heading one of your chapters is basically that the left, the kind of the consolidated left, which kind of merges with the fascistic right, if you want to think of it that way, but the kind of totalitarian, authoritarian types, they're all in favor of free speech when they're in the minority.
That's right.
So they can get their voices there, but as soon as they're in there, then they close the door. So this is similar to the Maduro Chavez example, or Castro or Hamas or whatever. They're all in favor of using the tools to get you there, but once they're there, then that's enough. I mean, we've already reached perfect truth, so that's us, and everyone else shut up. And so shut up is never really an answer. We don't develop science. We don't develop, any of our great dogmas and directions in society by having shut up be the answer. But that seems to be what we have in a fair amount of the universities, which, oddly enough, are there for discourse. In college, literally the term I think is collegium, which means to read together. And I assume university has to do with, coming up with universal truths and whatnot. Maybe you can tell me a little bit of the etymology and derivation of both the terms and the institutions themselves, and how they've been over time. I don't know if that's part of your, precis, but what was good? When were they right? Did we have like a golden age of college here in the United States? And have we left it? Are we kind of in the rusted age, and can we get it back?
Yeah, we left it. You have to remember, until the soldiers came back after World War II, there weren't that many people who actually had a college education. And so it was important. They valued it. People thought all the things that were written about it, a wonderful thing to do. And it was. And so with the GI Bills and the fact that they could go to college and that the economy was expanding very much so people could afford that. There were jobs that wanted college educated people and teachers and the like. So I would say since late 40s to end of the 1970s. It was the golden age of the university. And that was the point where the progressively, it was a dribble in thing. I had a critical race theory friend from Harvard, and it's in the book, and it's absolutely true. I was doing a justice for universities conference in early 1990s. And he came and we were talking about this, and he said, you have to understand, which was the funny thing about Sun Tzu, we're fighting a war of attrition. No question about it. We are fighting a war of attrition. We are carefully, and part of Sun Tzu's art of war is that you spend a great amount of time organizing, recognizing the vulnerable points, feeding on what they called the enemy, which was feeding on the freedom, the social justice commitments, the affirmative action commitments, the women's rights commitments, all of which are good to a degree. But when they basically shame people or convert the whole system or the majority of the system to acquiring a significant inflow of people who are hired and put in place not for their intellectual drive or things like that, but other characteristics, their political agendas. And they were part of a movement. And it was a coherent movement that met and really developed a strategy. And that's what they did. And they really, through the 70s, they gained power and place and numbers gradually. And then it accelerated. And by the time you got to the 90s, in the mid 90s, the takeover was pretty much complete. And by the early 2000s, it basically was complete. And we just didn't know it. Yeah. One of the things that happened was in the COVID thing, probably one of the only good things of the COVID situation was that they did remote teaching. And that's where the K through 12 things come in, because parents who took it for granted that their kids are being educated by smart, intelligent, fair, just people who were teaching the same kind of things that they had learned, all of a sudden said, "What the hell? What is going on there?" And then I published a book titled "Uncanceling America" in 2021. And the essence of, that had a lot to do with, why I went ahead with this one, because it has 600 examples across many institutions, journalism, universities, K through 12, business, government, et cetera, 600 examples total of the movements. And the lack of honesty in those movements is stunning, because for teachers particularly, their administrators were saying, you go ahead, I know they're complaining, but you go ahead and do what you're doing, which is really DEI and critical race theory, a whole hell of a lot of it. You go ahead and do what you're doing, but say you're not, and don't admit and don't show them the materials. They totally lied about what they were doing. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. It's you know, it's like you mentioned Sun Tzu, or in Islam there's taqiyya.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Which is, you know, basically don't let the enemy know what you're doing. Getting back to kind of my Hamas Gaza example, or Maduro Venezuela, or Chavez, Castro Cuba, whatever example you want to pick. You know, the one man, one vote, one time kind of concept is when you get in, you're all done. I came across this quote from 1993. I think his name is Omar Ahmed. He was part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and you know, they were talking about how important it was to get people on campuses. This is 1993. To you know, sympathize with the Palestinian cause. He said we go from campus to campus, and there's like nobody who doesn't have a pro-Israel view. On the professors,
right.
And this is not the dark age. What, it's like 30 years ago. It's not forever ago, and so they had to set to work to change that. Hugely successful. You know, it's like you see the stuff that's going on campuses. You wonder whether they are actually, you know, studying anything in Columbia and all the other campuses. You know, the irony I always mention is, you know, people hear about the Taliban and they probably think, they think that's a bad thing. Although the Taliban is not necessarily different, you know, philosophically much from Hamas. I think Hamas is the ISIS version of the, you know, Palestinian movement, but whatever. But the word Taliban means students, you know. Yeah. And there's always been this kind of like revolutionary student fervor. And then you have to wonder, student of what? And you know, you're mentioning the kind of pre-GI Bill that, you know, going to college was a rarity. I mean, over and over again, you know, growing up, I always hear, I was the first member of my generation to go to college, or of my family to go to college. First generation. And my generation, you know, I went to a nice little school in New York City, private, you know, high school. You know, everybody, I mean, it didn't even occur to me not to go to college. Everybody, we were all guided to college. I had no idea. When I heard that it was rare to go to college, I was kind of flummoxed. I'm like, everybody goes to college. All my friends were going to college. Right. I don't think we all had direction per se about why we're doing it. But the more I researched this, you know, I read that, you know, when they came up with high school, the term high school was there because nobody went to high school. People, you know, in the, you know, mid 19th century, they, you know, if they were lucky, they had elementary school where they learned the elements, and then they had high school if they had to be like the actuary, the mayor, you know, somebody running something. They went to high school, and the stuff they actually learned in high school was much more factual based than what kids graduating college have. Kids graduating college may not even know, you know, who's the, you know, how a bill passes Congress. If you think of that famous cartoon, whatever, they have no concept of you know, geography. I mean, I think they unlearn more than they learn, and you know, a lot of these things tend to be kind of temporizing, you know, kind of social movements to keep kids, you know, I don't know, incubated long enough until they are adults and they can come out and have jobs. But I'm not sure how much, you know, our schooling matches with what the tasks are at hand, and whether it actually helps, you know, them become marketable or employable after school.
Well, another book I wrote, published in 2019, was Artificial Intelligence Contagion. Can democracy survive? The subtitle, Can Democracy Survive the Imminent Transformation of Work, Wealth, and the Social Order? And the answer to that is, it doesn't seem that it's going to, or that it has, you know, because we have a Republican form of government and we're at each other's throats and want to kill each other. And a lot of the research I'm now have been doing for years, has to do with the transformation of work. Because when you look at, and you're a doctor, and even in the medical profession, or not only particularly, but in the medical profession, there are all kinds of things going on that bring in AI diagnostic systems and robotics and operation surgeon eye surgeon, microsurgery, and everything. And the question is, to what impact will that ultimately have on how many people go to be doctors? But that's going on in virtually everything. One thing I'm trying to do when I look at jobs, because I have files and files, and they say, 800 million jobs lost in the next 10 years, 30 million jobs lost, 300 million by different agencies. When we hear that kind of statistic, our brains shut down. I mean, what the hell can we do about that, right? So we don't understand what's really going on. So I'm looking at the different companies that are firing and laying off people by the tens of thousands. And they're some of the ones that are considered to be the advanced things. And every time they say the reasons, they try to gloss it over, but it really has to do with, we don't need paper pushers. We don't need people doing these little, these fundamental time-consuming labor intensive, but we can do it with AI systems and robotic systems. And so they are getting rid of so many people. You talk about the dangers to universities. You say, what? And another thing I'm working on writing is, when they take over, what do our children do? Because I'm old, okay? And then the issue is, I'll be dead by the time the worst of it all happens. But our kids who are being uneducated and diseducated right now, and wrongly educated and distortedly educated, they're the ones who are going to bear the total brunt on every level of this system. And the people who are looking at it are, there's so much wrong advice about what's going to happen and what to do. Everybody has an opinion, and most of those opinions aren't worth crap.
So kind of to get to that major point, you have your Barnhizer magic wand, and you could say fix something. What are the sometimes it's like, some of these things, it's like a cruise ship heading into a shoal. It may be too late to turn the cruise ship around. It's just such a big thing. It has so much momentum in the waves, and it's not really like turning a I don't know, something smaller, a skateboard or a bicycle or a car. So you have a certain amount of like society, that kind of momentum of this cruise ship heading into the the rocky path. So but given that, is it something that we just have to like forego this current cruise ship, the university system, let it kind of do its own thing and rot, and find alternatives? I mean, Peter Thiel, I think Elon Musk, to a certain extent, they would just as soon people abjure or eschew, avoid college, and kind of follow their muse, do something useful, and get their hands dirty, as it were, learn to fail, try a few things, bang their head, whatever, and come up with something, rather than just kind of go through this rote, baby bird, absorption of worm food, which may not even be that useful or nutritive for the mind. So this, I think we can agree that there's a certain amount of like non-productive, self-hating teaching that's going on in our colleges, and non-teaching and so forth. Anyway, what are the things that you find most noxious being taught in the schools? How would you fix it? You're the grand administrator. You're not the border czar, but you're the university czar. What does Professor Barnhizer do?
Do you give me control of all the institutions of power in the society? So by that, I'm not trying to be funny. I'm saying what you're describing, you have a bunch of self-styled revolutionaries that are basically fanatics. And a lot of them are academics. And their only identity is screaming about the tragedies of society and how somebody has to be held accountable. And predominantly that's us. By that, I mean you and me. You have this system where you really are dealing with people very many people who are intense ideologues, and they're the ones that have captured the top tiers of the university system, administratively and to some extent faculty. And they congregate, and they are vicious when you pose a threat to them. People you know, as I said, I'm a professor emeritus. I mean, I criticize things even but I'm fairly unusual in that. But, I understand why people don't put their heads on the line to get chopped off, because there are so many people who are afraid, even the ones who fully understand what's going on and want to stop it. They're either retiring or they're being quiet because but even by being quiet, when issues hit, like this protest and the Palestinians and Hamas, silence is violence. Remember that? Silence is violence. And so if it isn't enough just not to do anything in their support, because that's bad, not to support them affirmatively. And I'm not making it up. I mean, the state of fear in this country, and it's understandable because you lose your job. Where do you go? What do you do? Because you're not only losing your job, you're being typed in that system as somebody who doesn't deserve to be part of that system. So I understand why the fear that a huge number of people have. So
Yeah.
back to your question, what do you do? I think you break a number of colleges, and that it has to, by that I mean they're in trouble anyway, because the population growth and the supply of people to go to the university right now is dwindling so rapidly. And the Chinese Confucius studies programs are dying off. And they've been feeding on foreign students who they charge full tuition to for decades. So they're discounting American students significantly in terms, at least many of them, in terms of how much they have to pay. They may say 50,000 tuition, but then only pay 25,000 because they're feeding on the foreign students. So it wouldn't hurt to have a dramatic reduction in number of foreign students, as a number of states are doing, specifically defunding DEI programs, because they have grown to the point where they are basically evil. And they don't even mean it. This is the characteristic of the Marxist and Orwellian movement. They use the words. I love the idea of diversity. I've been all over the world. I've worked all over the world. I get along very well with people unless they're jihadi Muslims and want to kill me. And, some friends got killed in Bangladesh when I was there doing a project. And so, and blown up and right in the middle of their national day, 100 yards from where I had just been, that's where it went off. So it's fascinating. This is what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a bunch of vicious, vile nutcases who, just like Hamas. Hamas is the killer of their own Palestinian people because of their own actions. And they still swear we're going to destroy Israel. Now, how insane does that seem? That's what they are. I mean, I just have no. I can respect the Palestinian people. I can understand some of the history of the Zionist movement and how it moved into that territory from the 1880s and so on. I'm not knocking it because it had been their land also. But what they're really doing there is Hamas stands for they're being facilitated to get rid of Israel, to try to demean them so they can have the grand caliphate all over the Middle East. And then they're trying to get into Europe too. I mean, I'm not ignorant on these issues. And it just, I saw it happening. I said I've lived in London 3 different times. I saw the change each time I went. And you could just see people became afraid to even talk about immigration. Now it's blowing up on them to some degree. But the things you can do is go back to say, this is what the future is. These are the jobs, to the extent that I have a grandson who was drifting. He is now 22, 23. He is a boss head in one of the critical car companies now, and doing extremely well, because he said, "What should I do, Papa?" And I said, "Well, you really don't want to go to college because it's not going to give you anything." He spent about 6 months in there, and he he just said, what on earth? And so he said, what do I do? And so you get a trade, you work on a trade, you get job experience. I worked in steel mills. My whole family worked in steel mills. I ran crane for Republic Steel in Youngstown. You get that experience, you get that interaction with people, and they're not getting it in colleges now. You're not getting any kind of serious, you're getting interactions with people who are on a political acid trip, but you're not.
I like that, on a political acid trip. That could be your next book.
God, it could be, or yours. I mean, go ahead. But that is what, that's the thing. They're not getting it with real people. And anybody who has been hiring the products of universities, not it's bad K through 12 too, but the products of universities, the reality is anybody I talk to often can't wait to get rid of them. And they get rid of them if they're not the woke employer, they get rid of them pretty damn quickly in that. So it's a real issue.
It's funny. I'm a medical doctor, but I've done some other forays. And at one point, probably about a decade ago, I had a startup in the tech world. And I had a couple interns go through. One was from Harvard. Another was from he'd gone to college here, but then he'd been to the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. But a nice young kid, handsome, well put together. If you had a marriageable daughter, you'd want them to get together. But I don't know. So he did various tasks for me. Well, each of them did. And I had a number of them. But anyway, these two in particular. But the one I was mentioning, I don't know how we got on the topic, but he just said, he basically thought there should be no prisons. It had nothing to do with the company. We were just having lunch, and we were just, shooting the breeze. And it's like, well, how does this all work out? I don't want to bring up personal things, but if you have a sister and somebody, does X, Y, and Z, very, very bad things to her, or does some very bad thing to your mom, whatever. What do? You're going to chat with the guy? Basically, yes. You could bring him to therapy, you talk with him, you find his motivations, you do all that stuff, and it's kind of like catch and release, with fishing, one of those little paid trout ponds or something. Anyway, we didn't, I wasn't hiring him. He was there to get something on his resume, and I was there to have him do, kind of some tasks for me, spreadsheets and whatnot. But nice looking guy, articulate and so forth. But would I hire him? Would I have him in my company long term if I were running something, a big company? And it's an open question. I don't know, because I'd have to say compared to what? I mean, who else am I hiring? And the Harvard kid was a really nice kid, but he went through 4 bicycles. They were high-end bicycles while he worked for me, just in a matter of like 3 or 4 months. And he would leave them outside unlocked.
And they weren't his. Were they his?
So they were his bicycles.
Okay.
They were his bicycles. He'd buy them. I think he came from well-off family.
Okay.
And over and over, and they were devastating to him. And he would lose a bicycle, but he wasn't locking them because I don't know what. It was just in each of these cases, the common theme here was kind of a naivete. And these are like college kids. These are kids like seniors in college. It's like, I think you could find almost anybody without a college education that age who would not do either of those two things, either say there should be no prisons and or leave their hard-earned, $500, $700 bicycle, untethered.
That's right.
And it's just like, so that's 10 years ago. I don't know. I was a STEM guy, and we didn't call it that back then, but I was a chemistry and physics major, and I was kind of mathy, and so forth. And I was at college to learn, technical things, I guess. I wound up, converting into this little, whatever it is, medical degree here. And that became a decent living, whatnot. But, I always kind of had this little romantic view of the people who were, had these books, Lukács and Gramsci and whatnot, the kind of sweatered gals in the library. It was, oh, I mean, they'd be, and I'd ask them, like, I mean, I was naive or curious back then, what is that? And I remember one was Gramsci, because I remember the name, and I've seen it a lot lately. It comes up in our discussions on these topics. And the gal I was asking that question, I mean, she had a hard time defining what it all was, just like people have a hard time defining deconstruction or whatever. But but there's all kinds of courses. I mean, I was like kind of mystified that people could do. I had roommates and whatnot who had studied that kind of stuff, and I would ask them the end of the season, end of the semester, whatever. What was that? What was that about? Like, I don't know. We're all done with that. We did the test. We're all done. But
Right.
what useful item are you getting from that? I don't know. I mean, I think there's something to be gained by like training the brain to kind of go through things, but none of this was critical. This was at Yale back in the 70s, like in the golden age, as you say, of colleges.
Oh, Yale entered the process earlier.
Maybe, I don't know. But we still had a lot of open discussions. It was a real, I really loved college because people could talk about anything back then.
Yeah.
I just don't think that's the case now. I don't think we didn't have this cancel culture. We didn't have social media. We didn't have people taking out their camera and kind of gooning you up and turning you to a non-person. So I don't know. I mean, there just seems to be all this kind of morbid and septic, cancel culture that's going on campuses, and it's hard to see how you salvage the institution unless you just do parallel things. I mean, I think one of my buddy's sons makes an excellent living. He makes like 4 times what I made at my peak right now, and he's in his 20s. And he is, I'm not going to mention what he does precisely, but he has basically YouTube channel, big social media presence, and he produces this stuff, and it has to do with video games and whatnot.
Right.
But he did go to college, but what he's making the money on, and a son of another friend of mine made a fortune, doing kind of these mock music videos. Also went to college and whatnot. But their money comes from stuff that they could easily have done, without having done the college part. Unless that's just a matter of making connections and so forth, and kind of credentialing yourself so people will hire you. But a lot of the imaginative stuff, the thing that really makes coin is when you kind of like make a connection from A to B, and you do that, I think, just more through trial and error, which is not necessarily something that is grown and harvested and encouraged within a lot of the college atmosphere.
Right. I agree.
So I'm going to posit 2 questions for you, rather than just ranting the whole time. But the 2 questions are the grade inflation we see at colleges. I think the median grade, not the mode or the mean, but the median grade at Harvard is A- undergrad. First of all. Second of all, we have this tenure system, which I think has become inimical with the original mission. The original mission was that you're just going to say and do, say what you have to and what you need to for the sake of truth. But I think it's become much more of a club, like picking like. So people only kind of tenure the ones who agree with their basic tenets and won't challenge them. I'm wondering if you can pick up in either one or both of those.
I can, but my pickup would be to start. You're absolutely right. Begin with that. I mean, but it also have to think about the age structure and with particular discipline of what the tenured professor is doing. If it's an older professor, you've got some security, but they don't want to end their life in academia. They can still be put into trouble, and administrators, even if they have tenure and even if they don't try to take their tenure away, and there's been some of that, but assuming that they keep their tenure, the administrators can make their life miserable by scheduling decisions, what they have to teach, when they have to teach it, other things they have to do are responsible for doing. So they can suffer even if they're able to keep their activity and their status. The problem is they don't want to do something that triggers the response from the administrators. The administrators are at least as large a problem as a faculty member, academic. but that is part of the problem. For the younger faculty, I agree completely on that. It can be a little different in the hard stuff, the sciences, some of the sciences, chemistry, if you're teaching chemistry or something like that. But if you're in one of the social science or what we'll call the soft areas, where they have invented that have a political content, and the incoming faculty, the younger faculty, have invented all these wide-ranging, totally political courses that they want you better teach the policy and the politics that they want, or you're not going to get tenure. Or if you get tenure, see, one thing they're doing now is tenure to an extent is disappearing. They're not, a lot of places are shifting to contract, like a 5-year renewable contract issue, or adjuncts, or even shorter kinds of things, just agreements. That means they can get rid of, even if you want to be. I couldn't get hired now. I have the total proven range of productivity and other things. A very fine teacher, I think, at least the students of the time thought. So I'm not concerned about any of that. But if they buck the system and they're on a renewable thing, they can find themselves given notice, never even get to any kind of ongoing permanent status. The adjuncts that are used, half the people, the studies are half the faculty teaching university courses are not on the tenure track. Mm-hmm. And so the whole thing is decaying. And the way it's decaying is that, assuming that the DEI, critical race theory, et cetera, people have control of the administration and much of the faculty committee stuff, then they can get rid of you whenever they want. When you see a report on somebody who lost their tenure because they said something wrong, they didn't lose their tenure. That they are fired because somebody's reacting to their behavior or language, that's almost always a short-term, like a 1-year appointment person who gets to come every year and teach a course or two. And then it was easy for them because they have no legal protections. Easy for the university administrators to get rid of them. So the system itself has redesigned itself to give more power, just like, Chavez gets into office, and you've quoted Venezuela, gets into office, and one of the first things he did was change the constitution so he can be there until he dies, basically. And Maduro comes in and then cheats on his, he controls, because our courts are weakening, but most other places, certain places like that, the courts are, I taught in Russia too, and the courts they look like courts, but they do whatever the administrations tell them. That's what the reality is. Yeah. So that's my reaction in terms of what, that's the reality of what exists on the faculty administration. But the thing you can do, their money's going to be cut some degree because they're going to have fewer students. They are having fewer students. Cut to some degree the foreign students, because they're not doing it because they want foreign students. They're doing it because they want the money and many of them are Muslim. Some are Chinese Communist Party students, and they're milked into that system on purpose, and they get the money and they control. And they actually traditionally exercised, once they got a hold and started providing the universities with a substantial amount of money, they got a hold on whether anybody could say anything bad about China.
Right.
They influence.
I think I think there's an interesting lever there for our cruise ship, the rudder, which is, follow the money. A fair number of our, colleges and universities are state owned.
Yes.
I think this is a growing phenomenon, because a lot of the private schools are going out of business and consolidating, and they get purchased, kind of subsumed to the state. And the state, is probably going bankrupt just as well and just as much, but you don't notice it. I forget who said, about I think it was Hemingway, how you go bankrupt. It's gradually and then all at once. There's two ways,
I don't know. Victor Davis Hanson, I read something that this pastor, he wrote something that was just that, used that.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure Hemingway had it, but neither here nor there. I mean, it's open for requoting. You ever see that thing where Abe Lincoln has a meme on internet? Don't believe everything you read on the internet, Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, I did. One of my brothers sent it to me recently.
But anyway, so we'll leave that aside. But the point remains that there are levers that we have. Questions whether we want to bother at all. I mean, I think Ron DeSantis has some of the right attitude. We are not going to fund you. The University of Florida, right, system, and the state colleges and this and that, Florida State University of all that kind of stuff. And then there's community college. I mean, there's a lot of college system which is just an arm and a branch of the state, which in a sense is covering for the other branch of the local state, which is the high schools, which are graduating people that can't read and whatnot. So it's kind of just a system which seems to do very well at paying for itself. I mean, Mark Stein, the incredible, brilliant writer under fire in the UK. He at one point about General Motors, he said it's I'll try to get this right. He said it's a hugely successful pension funding scheme with a money losing automotive arm.
Yeah.
But by the same token, what we have here is an incredible resource devotion towards leftists with a kind of a money losing education arm. We are not educating people adequately. We're not educating them, say, productively, using adequate resources. But we do have a burgeoning coterie of DEI / critical, CRT / revolutionary Marxists ready and willing to topple the very generous hands that feed them and the taxpayers who fed those. And you get the idea. But at some point you just kind of stop funding the thing and it doesn't grow as much.
That's right.
That's what and frankly, my taste, my druthers would be to have a parallel system where you kind of YouTube your own, tasks. If you want to become a real estate agent, you can just go. You can probably do that through the internet very easily. If you have a certain amount of tasks, in this Coursera, there's a whole bunch of course-oriented things where you're task-oriented. You learn, at just in time, as needed basis. And the universities don't do that. I mean, I think there are people who benefit from, the classic liberal arts education, and they have the trivium, which is not trivial, but the three kind of reading, writing, and arithmetic were the three bedrock aspects. I mean, it was actually rhetoric, I suppose science and math, whatever the actual trivium was. But you can see I'm not liberally educated enough. But some people, yes, maybe the lawyers, maybe the people who are supposed to be judges and whatnot. Maybe they need to have liberal arts and so forth. But I think it's lost on a lot of people, and it's just kind of fudged. People kind of, there's an old Soviet joke. They pretend to pay us. This is from the workers. They pretend to pay us. We pretend to work.
Yes.
And I think there's a fair amount of that happens in colleges, that people just study to the test. They don't necessarily believe all the CRT stuff they're kind of force fed, but they know what the teacher wants. They go to ChatGPT. They come up with the right formulation of the things that the teacher wants to hear. They do the test, and it's quickly forgotten. And I produced, two men, and they both went to college, and they had different experiences, but one of them was more of that type. He's like, I don't really care. I'm not there for that. I want the degree, blah, blah, blah. And right. He would do just enough to satisfy the teacher, and his grades were fine, but he didn't care about any of that stuff. So I think it's kind of this, they pretend to educate us, we pretend to learn, and we get the credential, we get this BA or whatever degree, master's, so in front of us, and then we look better for people who ostensibly want to hire us. But I think you could get rid of all that if you just went to a credentialing system. If you want to get your CFA, you need a college degree to get it, but it requires a lot of work, which should have been taught in college, frankly.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a question there, but maybe we're rounding out the hour. I'd like you to wrap up, and I'm going to show people your book and how to buy it and so forth. Maybe you can give us kind of a closing statement of where we are. What are the escape valves? What can people do? What should they know? And would you have you already kind of answered this question with your grandson, but what would you have people do regarding colleges and how they can kind of fix things?
Okay. I think we need what you said. We need colleges that change the character of what they're teaching. First of all, begin with the fact that the changes in society are so dramatic, and the changes in the job market and even human relations are so dramatic that nobody who purports to be teaching past disciplines, past categories, except for the very technical and specialized, really knows what the future's going to hold. So you have to create, you have to give people the chance to develop critical skills, understand the importance of the one thing I would not really disagree with you is I love the humanities in the sense it's not worth going 4 years for, not in the slightest. But in part, it contains the ideals. When people talk about civics and the like, in part, it contains ideals of the kind that should be transgenerational, that we ought to be able to talk to each other. You ought to be able to talk to your kids. I ought to be able to talk to my kids on fundamental principles and assumptions that exist within the country or should exist that tend to create a foundation and stabilize the country. So I think there needs, and it could happen in high school. It doesn't have to happen in college. They bailed on it in high school. I mean, I had some of that stuff, a fair amount of that stuff in grade school and high school, and I learned a lot on my own. And then I, got multiple degrees. And so what? But it doesn't have to happen with this airy-fairy group of people who think that they really know what they're talking about the future, because they don't. I mean, I study it a lot, so I'm not pretending. I mean, I'm willing to talk to people about it. I'm willing to think and write about it and critique me. I'm right, I'm wrong.
Well, I agree with you there. Getting away from colleges slightly, back to, public schools, primary and secondary education. Albert Einstein, if he were up and around today, would not be able to teach physics in high school. No. He'd have to go get a teaching certificate. And that, the teachers will tell you that they're not teaching CRT in the schools, but their curriculum where they go is motivated and suffused with that. And so even if they're not specifically applying, they're teaching almost all their courses through a lens, maybe not physics per se, although sometimes. I got to tell you, my kids both went to public schools in Newton, Massachusetts, and there were times even in physics that they were getting leftism 101. One of my kids, I think it was physics class in high school, they basically had to come up with a reason why people should have children. Against the contrapositive, which was that they should not have children because their children are going to be wasting the earth, that more people are going to be wasting the earth. And that, so the physics teacher was kind of implanting this concept, which is the only thing, I guess, to be implanted in some of them, as opposed to an actual child someday, which is that none of them should have children because and this is physics. It's like, dude, do the physics stuff. Yes. If you want to engage somebody, maybe you meet them at the farmer's market or something like that, talk about that stuff, fine. But I was kind of railing against this stuff over and over again. I got very much nowhere because they know you're only a temporary customer. They're going to be there for the long term. You got your kid in there for a couple of years. You don't want to make too many waves. Your kid doesn't want you to make waves either. But over and over again, it was, they had a misdirection. They're supposedly teaching you something, and they're not. And this is a sadness. I think it's a huge sadness. And the way to get at it is to stop paying for it. Speaking of General Motors, when you buy a car, I mean, to a certain extent, some of the car manufacturers have been subsidized here and there, but on a general basis, no. When you buy your clothing, your shoes, your books, and so forth, you're just buying that thing qua that thing. You're not part of this huge club where you have to take out a $200,000 loan and sit there 4 years and earn your car. You just buy your car and that's it. You don't like that car manufacturer goes down. If everyone hates the Edsel or whatever it is, it disappears. Maybe Ford doesn't, whatever. That doesn't happen in the universities because they don't have any business model. So I would like to get them back on a business model footing. I would like to dissect the thing. I wouldn't get rid of everything, but I would carve it up into small enough pieces that they would sink or swim on their own budgets. And if it's necessary, fine. Some people really, really, really need to learn, ancient Roman history. Okay, totally cool. But, it has to be kind of in keeping with what the value proposition is. Maybe there's some great teachers and you just consolidate them, put them on YouTube and give a course on it, whatever. And people can learn it. And I frankly learned a lot more Roman history after college than I ever did in it. Sure. And there's nothing stopping you from learning as you go. But for the people who don't want it, well, dude, don't. If you're just going to be my, car mechanic, I don't necessarily need a car mechanic well versed in, Antioch, or the Ottoman Empire, whatever. It's cool if he is, but most of the information that people are getting these days are because they research things ancillary to playing their video game or watching Game of Thrones. They learn about the War of the Roses because they watch Game of Thrones, and that's fine. Anyway, so getting back to you, a you thing, I'm going to put your book up here, and you can tell us, I don't know, I guess, why people should buy this book. And here it is on Amazon, Conformity Colleges. I got to see if I can squeeze the whole title in there. And then it's the Destruction of Intellectual Creativity and Dissent in America's Universities. And there you have it. Any last words for us? And I'm going to end with a self-promotion myself.
I think, and it has gotten a lot of very good reviews and done a lot of podcasts. I'm an academic in part on many things, but academic. I don't write for money. I hope people would buy it because it's interesting. It's available electronically, and I guess audible version also. I think it's worth reading, but other than that, I think it's a very good analysis of what is going on.
Very thorough, and it has a fabulous introduction by Jeffrey Tucker, who almost literally writes like an angel. I've never met an angel, but he's got a beautiful incredible lyric quality to his writing, and he gives summaries to the concept of university, which brought up things of which I had not been aware. He's a friend of mine, and and a mentor, and I very much enjoy his writing, which you can find in Epoch Times and in your book. So that's another reason to buy it. And if people want to help support my podcast here, my mundane efforts, they can go spend money again at Amazon. And coincidentally, that's one of the features of my book, Zika. It took place in the Amazonian area as well, more in the northeast of Brazil. But it was a big deal in 2015, 2016, the Rio Olympics. And it disappeared. Yeah. And nobody in science and medicine or bureaucracy can tell why, because the money's still there. And I think there's a great quote. I can't remember who said this. I don't think it's Sun Tzu, but basically, if people are paying you money, it's all to do research. It's unlikely you're ever going to refute the concept for which you were paid. So there's kind of like an emperor's new clothes phenomenon here, where I'm that guy. I'm not a little bit like your emeritus status. I'm a medical doctor, but I'm just a primary care. I'm not in academia. I'm not losing any research grants by pointing out that Zika microcephaly, Zika is a real dengue virus, but it's probably not a human susceptible virus. And it's a dengue type virus. And microcephaly is a real but very, very rare phenomenon with babies getting small heads. It just so happens that one has nothing to do with the other. The science was shoddy and should frankly be overturned. That's the nature of the book. So people can go buy it, and even better if they read it, and even better if they read it, buy it, give me a good review.
I tend to think WHO every time I see things spread any more of the fear of a pandemic. Right. I mean, they're trying to capture so much.
They have their own business model. Speaking of business models, they have their own business model, which is they profit through these intermediaries from the vaccine money pharmaceuticals gets. Pharmaceuticals give the money to certain granting institutions that goes to the WHO. It's kind of a regulatory capture cycle. I covered that with my last interview with Dr. David Bell from a few days ago, so people can reference that. Thank you so much, Professor Barnhizer. David, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank
and I'm very in your debt for your time and effort. And I thank you so much for having written the book.
Thank you. I really do appreciate it.